Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see you tonight. Thanks for being here for this time of Bible study on this hot Wednesday night in Tennessee. We're glad that we have this time to join together and study, and we're encouraged by your presence and participation. We're starting a new study tonight, which is actually an immediate follow-up to the one that we just concluded last Wednesday night. We've been studying Galatians pretty extensively, both on Sunday morning and Sunday night. Sunday morning, we've been going through the book verse by verse. In this Wednesday night class, we just concluded looking at the works of the flesh, Galatians 5, verses 19 through 21. And hopefully that was helpful. We've got those things well in mind as to meaning of those terms and what we need to be careful to avoid. It just seems logical for us to follow up on that with just going to the immediate next verses, chapter 5 of Galatians, verses 22 and 23. And so that's our plan, to look at the fruit of the Spirit as defined, as explained there. Let's look at Galatians 5, 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. So a couple of verses that have a lot of important words and terminology in them. And so our plan for the next few weeks is to look at the fruit of the Spirit as listed there. I don't think we have so much trouble with definition on these terms. Maybe on the works of the flesh, there were a few of those that we need to make sure we really had a good working understanding of the definitions. But here in the fruit of the Spirit, I don't think that we have really a lot of problem with those words. Here I think the problem is more of application. Make sure that we're making application and that we have the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And so we'll really be stressing that as we look to these over the next few weeks. We start out with the one that we're going to follow, as we did before. We're going to follow the King James wording. We're going to follow the King James listing. And if you're reading a different English translation, it might be slightly different, but hopefully it'll be similar enough that we'll catch it all together. So the very first of these, mentioned as the fruit of the Spirit, is love. That's a great place to start. And of course, a lot is said about love in the Scripture. This word, love, is from the Greek word that we probably know better than any other Greek word, and it is the Greek word agape. We see that word a lot. I think lots of us are not great Greek scholars by any stretch of the imagination. We don't maybe know a lot of Greek words, but this one has caught the attention of the English-speaking world, and you see the word agape a lot. You will see it even certain businesses maybe use the word agape in their company name. You see T-shirts a lot with agape on it. We know the word agape. We understand that is the Greek word for love, and we see it and we understand what it means, I think. Let's look to these definitions. Strong says that agape is affection or benevolence. So when you think about doing benevolence, you don't necessarily, you wouldn't think about benevolence in regards to someone that you maybe had a feeling of romantic love for someone. Romantic love and benevolence, that just doesn't seem like those things don't go together at all. Love and benevolence. I think Vine does the best job of explaining this. He says that agape here is love, notice, not an impulse from feelings. I think commonly when people today think of love, they think of sort of this warm, sort of ooey gooey feeling, romantic, inclinations. Vine says, and I think accurately so, this kind of love is not an impulse from feelings, does not always run with the natural inclination. Notice, I think that's interesting. Does not always run with the natural inclinations. Natural inclinations, about love, we sometimes even talk about there's a certain chemistry between these two people. Or it's love at first sight. Vine says that's not this at all. Now understand that there are words in the Greek that would probably apply to those kind of feelings. There are several words in the Greek language that are all translated by the English word love. I think this one's probably the best known. This one is actually the most important one. But notice it doesn't necessarily run with the natural inclinations. And so there might be this guy, maybe he's a brother in Christ, but we don't have a lot in common. In fact, I don't really necessarily enjoy being around him. My personality and his sort of clash, We don't have great chemistry. There's not a natural inclination for us to spend a lot of time together as buddy-buddy. But I can still love him, right? This agape love does not always run with the natural inclination, nor does it spend itself only upon those for whom some affinity is discovered. I think that's interesting that Vine says, this kind of love is not exclusively toward people that I have sort of a natural bond. And we all have experienced this. There are just some people that we're just sort of naturally attracted to some people. We just hit it off. We just almost immediately like this individual. We feel this affinity for them. Vine says that agape love is not exclusively for those people. It does not spend itself only on those for whom we have this sort of immediate attraction. I think very importantly, he says it seeks the welfare of all and works no ill to any. It is unselfish, ready to serve. And so if I have agape love, then maybe I don't have a great personal affection or affinity for this person. Maybe we don't share a lot of common interest. There's nothing that really draws us personality-wise to one another. But if I still love that person, I'm ready to serve him. I will unselfishly serve him. A lot of times when we talk about agape love, we talk about a kind of love that seeks the well-being of the other person, not self. Not self. The interest of the other comes first. Thayer says agape denotes affection, goodwill, love. And again, he mentions this idea of benevolence. Now, we're going to see in the King James, as we look to a number of verses here in a minute, we're going to see that the King James Version often uses the word charity. And that seems a little odd to us maybe, but when we think of charity, we think almost exclusively of benevolence, don't we? But it's in there. It's in the meaning of agape. It's not the totality of the meaning of agape, but benevolent concern for the well-being of another is in the definition of agape. And that's why that it's not a stretch when, of course, the King James is an older translation. But the King James translators saw a lot of this concept of benevolence in the word agape. It's most generally translated as love, but it is this selfless serving kind of love. It is not romantic love. It's not familial love. It's not like the love that a parent has for a child. There are different words, for these kinds of loves in the Greek language. But this love that we're supposed to have, that it is the fruit of the Spirit. If we have the fruit of the Spirit in us, then we're going to be the kind of people who will unselfishly serve others, even if this other someone is not necessarily someone that we're naturally attracted to. All right, thoughts or comments here by way of definition? Anybody? Anything we should add here? This is the highest level of love because this is, notice, it's not an impulse of the feeling, but it's an act of the will. I'm going to love that guy. He may not even be very lovable. I don't have great positive feelings toward him all the time, but he needs my help, and I love him, and I'm going to do for him. And it's not that I have this emotional feeling for him. It is that I am going to make a determined act of the will to assist him. Matt?
I think one of the best examples of this is when Jesus was teaching the Sermon on the Mount when he corrected the Jews' errors in Matthew 5 and verse 43. He says, "You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you.
Yeah. That's not normal. That's not just, I feel good toward this guy, therefore I'm going to do good for him. What Jesus said is not normal. Exactly right. John, did you have a thought? Okay.
I was just going to say, I mean, it doesn't matter how bad you're treated, it doesn't matter what somebody does to you at work or on the street or what have you. You know, if they're all of a sudden struck in a situation where they're about to die or be in peril of some sort, your natural inclination or your inclination to avoid it and changes to a person that can help.
So this is really calling us to a higher level than what would come naturally. Naturally, we might avoid some people, or naturally we might be attracted to some people. But this is not about what comes naturally. This is calling us to a higher level of action. Yancey?
This love comes from our desire to please God.
Okay.
And do His will.
And so we do this because God instructs us to do this. And it's not because it necessarily serves our selfish interest. It typically doesn't serve our selfish personal interest, but it's what God commands us to do, and it's in the behalf of the object of this agape love. Monty.
And as we do that, and we have that attitude, we understand that we're doing it in order to imitate God, because God loved us before we loved Him. God provided the plan of salvation before He made us, and He provided for all of our needs, even though typically as humans, as a race as a whole, we don't give any due diligence to serving God. The majority of people in the world don't. But nevertheless, He still provided for their needs, all of them, and their greatest need of salvation by sacrificing His Son. And man didn't ask for that, but God done it because He needed it, because we needed it, not because it benefited Him.
Okay. So God is the perfect example. Perfect example. Okay. Sarah?
I think it's interesting that he describes the works of the flesh. Work requires effortlessly, but he describes these as fruit. And you cannot produce fruit unless you're attached to the vine.
Yeah.
We can't show love unless we're attached to Jesus.
Yeah. And so this fruit is the product of, it is the fruit of the Spirit. It is what comes by being led by the Spirit. As you say, works of the flesh, we do that stuff. We shouldn't, but we do. This is what results from being led by God's Spirit. I think that's right. Mike?
We don't need to be condescending, we don't need to treat people like, well, you don't really deserve any love, but I'm going to love you anyway.
Yeah, look what I'm going to do for you, because I'm really a great guy, and you're sort of a lowly, undesirable person, but I'm going to be magnanimous here, and I'm going to do this for you. That's not it at all, is it? Exactly right. Herman.
I think you've got to go over to 1 Corinthians 13 and look at those qualifications things there that he talks about. He says, if you don't have love, you don't have anything.
Exactly right. And that is the quintessential definition of agape love in 1 Corinthians 13. Exactly right. All right, so what we're going to do in these studies, Lord willing, is we're going to do like we did previously when we were talking about the works of the flesh. We're going to look at verses where the word is used and what it implies, especially what it indicates should be the application. Now, there's not any way that we, in a single class, that we could cover all the instances where the word agape is used in the New Testament. If I counted right, it's used 106 times. So I just had to sort of pick some verses that maybe we could talk about. And again, the emphasis on application of agape love. It is a fruit of the Spirit. As Sarah, I think, was hinting at, you notice when it talks about fruit of the Spirit, it's not fruits of the Spirit, it's fruit of the Spirit. The indication is that if we're being properly led by the Spirit, as Sarah said, attached to the vine. Jesus said, I'm the vine, ye are the branches, in John chapter 15. And so all of this should come together. This is the fruit of the Spirit. It's not, well, I've got love, but maybe I don't have temperance, one of the others that will be listed later. This needs to all come together as the fruit of the Spirit. All right, let's talk about love. Let's look at some verses. Here's a famous place where Jesus used the word. Now again, remember there are different Greek words. You cannot assume every time that you read in your English Bible the word love that it is from the word agape, because that's not always so. And so you have to kind of look a little bit to make sure you're finding a passage where the love is agape love. And it is here in John chapter 13, beginning verse 34. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you love one another." So, love one another as I have loved you. Well, what kind of love did Jesus have for us? Well, he had that sort of completely selfless, serving love, didn't he? His entire existence on earth as a man wasn't to serve himself. It wasn't to seek his own advantage. It was to serve others, to serve us. And so he says, love one another like or as I have served you. So have this agape love. Have this selfless, serving love. And we've pointed out, we've talked about this passage lots of times. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one for another. In other words, so this should be like a hallmark of Christians. True disciples of Jesus will manifest this kind of love so much so that others will notice it. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have agape love for one another. And so this ought to be so characteristic of us that people, and it should be so consistently practiced by us that people actually observe it and see a distinction there between us and non-disciples. I wonder if that's true of us. I wonder how successful we are at practicing agape love. Do people see a distinct difference between us and the people of the world by virtue of how we treat one another? It's certainly something to think about, isn't it? Thoughts or comments? This is a very familiar statement from Jesus. Any thoughts or comments? Let's keep looking. We got money.
I think something important in this passage here is when we think about love and we're thinking about that gooey emotional feeling that we have. Emotions you really can't command. You have them or you don't. But Jesus said, this is a commandment that I've given you. So this is something we can pick and choose to do rather than just a feeling that we have.
I think that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up. This is a commandment. You know, so a boy meets a girl and he falls in love. You know, that's that emotional feeling. You can't command that feeling, right? You know that either is there or it's not there. You either feel it or you don't feel it. It just happens. That's not commanded. This is commanded. This is a kind of love that you can be commanded to have. I think Monty makes a very important point there. It's a commandment. Love in this way. Love in this selfless, serving sort of way. Very good.
Attitude that we develop and possess rather than a feeling that we have. Because there's only two things in life that we can truly control, and that's our actions and our attitudes. So if it's something that can be commanded of us, then it has to be an action or an attitude. And this one is an attitude that's going to demonstrate itself in our actions.
Okay. All right, good. All right, here's another place where it's used. Again, we're only going to be able to just get a sampling of the places where agape is used. Let love be without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. So this agape love should be without dissimulation. Dissimulation? What is dissimulation? Hypocrisy, right? In newer translations, it's translated as hypocrisy. And I think some English versions says, let love be genuine or sincere. And so, this sort of goes to what Mike was saying a minute ago. If I have true agape love, I'm not being a hypocrite. I'm not doing it to make a scene. I'm not putting forward a false face, which is the idea of hypocrisy. It is genuine, it's deep, it's sincere. There's no hypocrisy to it. And I think that's really important. Sadly, sometimes you see people acting, even in an act of serving someone else, they're doing it in a hypocritical sort of way, even a way that might serve their own purposes or draw light to them or draw attention to them. This love, this agape love, is to be without dissimulation or without hypocrisy. I think that's really an important thing. In Romans 13, verse 10, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. I was interested in this expression, and I asked you about it in your study guide. How is love the fulfilling of the law? Anybody got a thought on that? Love is the fulfilling of the law. Monty.
Jesus said the first commandment, the greatest commandment, was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. And that the second was to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, God demonstrated that love toward us by the things He's done for us. So when we have this agape love, we're not doing ill to our neighbor. You know, what we deserved from God was ill. But God, through the law, ultimately, the law of Christ, has provided good for us. And so when we're doing good to our neighbor, then we are doing what God, we're demonstrating what God done for us, and ultimately fulfilling the law by showing God's love.
Okay, I think you're right. The passage that Monty alluded to, one place where it's recorded is in Mark chapter 12. In Mark chapter 12, verse 28 beginning, one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, which is the first commandment of all? And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. So I think Jesus is basically saying the same thing in that longer explanation. Love is the fulfilling of the law, because if we love God and love fellow man with this true, deep, serving, selfless love, then we're going to keep all the rest of the law too, right? So, the law says don't steal. Well, I won't. If I love my neighbor, I won't steal from him. The Word of God says to worship Him faithfully. Well, if I love Him, I will. And so I think the point of what Jesus was saying and what Paul is repeating here in Romans 13 is that if I have this proper concept of love, then I will do what the law tells me to do in everything. Of course, Jesus, when He was answering that scribe, was talking about the law of Moses. But I believe the principle, and I think that's why Paul's repeating it here in Romans chapter 13. The principle is true about the law we live under too, right? That love is the fulfilling of the law. Thoughts or comments here? Mike?
You can hang all the law and the prophets on that one scripture there, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's
It covers it, doesn't it?
It just simply covers it all, and that's how it fulfills the whole law. It just simply covers the whole thing.
Yeah. Tina? Right. Okay, I think that's good. I think that's right. Anybody? Anything else? Monty?
As she mentioned, it reminded me of something he said Monday night in that lesson when Jesus said that was the law and the prophets. The first four of the 10 commandments had to do with our relationship between man and God. The final 6 of the 10 commandments had to do with our relationship between each other. So if we're loving each other,
All right, let's look at Romans 14. Romans 14, verse 15. But if thy brother be grieved with thy meat, now walkest thou not charitably. Destroy not him with thy meat for whom Christ died. Here's the King James, and it's using the word charity or charitable in this verse. And it's that word, it's the same word, it's the word agape. Now remember the context of Romans 14 real quickly. Remember there was big controversy among first century Christians. And it hinged especially on the question of whether you could eat meat, not meat generally, could you eat meat that had been sacrificed to idols? Because a common practice in the pagan cities of the first century, they had their pagan temples and they made animal sacrifices to them. But once they'd made the sacrifice to the idol god, then they would take the meat that had thus been sacrificed and they would take it to the common markets and sell it. And some first century Christians had a strong and deep abiding objection to that. They thought it was they just thought it was a corruption, and so they wouldn't do it. They thought it was an abomination. Others thought that meat's meat. The idol is nothing. Meat offered to the idol is nothing. I can eat that as well as anything else. That appeared to have been the right conclusion because Paul spoke to it here in Romans 14. He also spoke to that in 1 Corinthians 10. Yeah, he said, don't, you know, he basically said, if you're invited to a feast, eat what's put before you. But if someone says, you know, that meat's been offered to an idol, he says, don't eat it, not for your conscience sake, but for his, who is trying to make a point out of it. And so Romans 14 is dealing with that question specifically, but the application of the principle is stronger. So here in Romans 14, he's saying, if your brother is grieved by your meat, in other words, you're eating the meat offered to idols, which, by the way, happens to seem to be your liberty to do so. But he says if it's tearing him up, if it's really bothering him, but you're determined you're going to do it anyway. I don't care what you say, and I don't care how you feel. I will have my idol meat, and you can just live with it. And I'm offending him in the process. He's grieved by what I'm doing, and I'm so hard-hearted about it, I'm determined to do it anyway. He says there's no love in that. That's not charitable. That's not walking in love. And so the person with agape love is going to have, I think what this is telling us clearly is that I'm going to be concerned about you. And I don't want to hurt I don't want to offend you. Earlier in this passage, he talked about casting a stumbling block before someone. I don't want to trouble your faith. I'm not going to say, look at this meat I'm eating. Watch me eat my meat offered to the idol. There's no love in that kind of a proposition. So again, here, charity or love, agape, would say, even though you have a liberty, you if you're not selfish and if you're willing to be a servant, you could forego that liberty. You know, you don't have to eat that meat. That's the point it seems Paul's making there. 1 Corinthians 8, verse 1. Now, as touching things offered to idols, here's that same question. As touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. I think that in this passage, that part right there is satire. I think Paul is using sort of a satirical construction here. Oh yeah, we all know, right? Yeah, we all know. When it comes to this question of meats offered to idols, not everybody knows. Some people are really troubled by it, and you can't just say, "Oh yeah, everybody knows that." Everybody knows that. No, not everybody knows. He says acting that way that's puffed up. That's proud to act that way. Charity edifieth. So if we have love for one another, and instead of being proud and arrogant in our conduct, then we will tend to build others up and not tear them down. I think that's the gist of it there. But again, same context, or same problem under address. Herman mentioned earlier 1 Corinthians 13. That's the classic, isn't it? That's that passage. And when we get down to about verse 6, 7, and 8, we actually have all the descriptives of agape love, and we've studied that a lot in the past. Beginning verse 4. King James says charity, but it's love. Love suffereth long, love is kind, love envieth not, and all those characteristics of this agape love. I actually would love to just sit and go through that text again, but we're not going to do it tonight. But preliminary verses that lead up to that description of agape love. Paul says, though I speak with tongues of men and angels and have not charity, there's our word, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. That's really a significant statement. And again, we know that this very famous text in 1 Corinthians 13 goes on to describe agape love or charity. But this is telling us how important it is. How important is it that we get this right? It's ultimately important, right? Paul is saying here that if we don't get this right, we could do a whole lot of other really important, valuable things in the kingdom. If we don't get this right, he said it's all for naught. It's not going to get the job done. It's really important, and I think. I'm inclined to think that sometimes we downplay this, because we're talking about technical, doctrinal issues a lot, as we necessarily must. I want to make sure we're right on this, right on this, right on this, right on this. Absolutely so. Completely necessary. But if we don't get it all lined out correctly and have love in our hearts as commanded, then Paul's saying you can be right on it all. And if it's not with love, if you don't have this agape love, it's for nothing. Monty.
It gets back to our attitude again. There's one of the prophets in the Old Testament. God was so displeased with the people. He said he didn't want their sacrifices anymore. They were doing the right things, but their attitude about it was wrong. Even to the point he said, won't somebody just close the doors to the temple and y'all don't come in no more? So, as he said here, if you do all this right stuff, but you've got the wrong attitude about it, you're doing it because, I've got to do it. I'd rather not, but I've got to do it. Well, God would just assume you didn't do it anyway. And so that's why it profits you nothing, because your attitude's bad and it's not acceptable to God.
Okay, I think that's right. All right. Mike?
So, we have to love people, because if we don't, we can't love God. There's people that's made in the similitude of God. And not only that, it says to love, let us not love in word or tongue, but in deed and in truth. So in other words, it's just not good enough to say, I love you. You got to show that you love them.
Yeah.
Because anybody can sit there and say, oh, I love you. It's like if you get into an accident and get hurt and go, well, Mr. Glenn, I love you. I hope you have a good day.
Yeah.
Well, that's not good enough.
I think you're right. We're just about out of time. We may not get through this list, but we're not going to get through the total list of all the verses that use agape in the New Testament anyway. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 7, the beginning. Now, you got to remember the context of this. Remember, this was during Paul's final third missionary journey. And he was going, as he was going through the churches for the last time, he was taking up what they had collected. He was serving as a courier to take it to the needy saints in Jerusalem. And so this is a statement in regards to that work of them contributing toward the needy saints in Jerusalem. He says, therefore, as ye abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge, and in all diligence, and in your love to us, see that you abound in this grace also. I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others, and to prove the sincerity of your love. And so we'd have to get into this text a little deeper to get it all. But Paul was telling the Corinthians, he wanted them to follow through with taking up this collection for the needy saints in Jerusalem. And he says, this is not a commandment. He said, I'm not commanding what you have to do in regards to making this benevolent gift. But he says, what you do will prove the sincerity of your love. Think about that. Actions over words. It's sort of like what Mike was saying a minute ago. You can say you love someone, but you're going to prove it by what you do for someone. And remember, this agape love is the selfless, serving kind of love that seeks the interest of the other more than self. And how would you know that whether a person has that or not? How would you know whether a person has achieved agape love? Well, the only way you would know that by what they do, what you see them doing, right? So he says, prove the sincerity of your love by making this gift, by what you do. Here's Galatians 5:13. Brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not this liberty as an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. We just studied this in our Sunday morning class. Remember that the liberty that he's talking about there to those Gentile Christians was that they didn't have to keep the law of Moses. You've been called to this liberty. You don't have to keep the law of Moses. But he says, don't use that as an occasion to the flesh. That doesn't mean you can just go out here and do any and everything you want to do. You can't use this liberty as a license to do ungodly things. That's the first part of that verse. But here's what he wanted them to do. By love, there's our word, by love, serve one another. Boy, that puts it right in one verse, doesn't it? That this agape love, and that's the word here, agape love will cause you to be a servant to others. By love, by agape, serve one another. That's what we are to do. Real quickly, Ephesians 4, verse 14, beginning. That we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive, but speaking the truth in love, may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. So a couple places where the word is used here. So we are to speak the truth in love, and when we pursue this kind of love, then the body edifies itself. It grows. The church grows and prospers and benefits when this kind of love exists. It'd be interesting if we certainly don't have time to do it, but it'd be interesting to hear people talk about maybe places where you've been, congregations that maybe in the past where you were a member, or maybe some place where you have visited from time to time. Do you have any experience with a congregation wherein there is not a proper measure of love for one another? I think a lot of us would raise our hands and say, yeah, I've known of that. Sadly, I experienced that maybe. What happens to churches like that? Well, churches like that typically will not prosper. And we're not necessarily talking about numerical growth, although that could certainly be a part of it. But they're not growing spiritually if they don't have this love. It's not an edifying situation. People are not growing. Typically, those churches are kind of drying up and dying out. They're not edifying. It's not an edifying kind of situation where that love does not exist. Okay? Colossians 3:14. Above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. I chose this one because I thought this expression is kind of odd in the King James. So charity is the bond of perfectness. I don't know. That just doesn't seem to I don't know. It doesn't seem to compute very well in my mind. So I looked at some other versions. The English Standard Version, I think, does it really well here. Love binds everything together in perfect harmony. That makes sense to me, right? So we're working together, but we don't love each other. We don't have this agape love for each other. Therefore, it's just chaos. Nothing is good. It's just complete disaster. Everything's falling apart. On the other hand, though, here we are, and we have agape love. What happens? It binds everything together in perfect harmony. Everything works, and we're in harmony. It's perfect harmony because, not because we are perfect people, but we can work together in perfect harmony because we have this love for one another. It's really important, right? We're seeing just the extreme importance of this. Just out of time, 1 Thessalonians 3:11, God himself and our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ direct our way unto you, and the Lord make you to increase and abound in love one to another and toward all men, even as we do toward you. So, just a simple point here. This agape love we should be abounding in it, but it's something we should constantly be increasing in. This is not the kind of a characteristic that you can say, I got it. I have done that. I can check that one off, and I'll move on to some other things maybe that I need to work on. But I don't have to work on agape love anymore. I've got that. I've got that covered. No, you don't. You actually don't. This is something that you need to keep increasing in, and hopefully our lesson tonight, if it doesn't do anything else, just stresses the importance of us doing so. So the first part of this fruit of the Spirit is love. So extremely important. The word agape is used over and over again, over 100 times in the New Testament. We've just touched the hem of the garment, so to speak. But we see how really vitally important it is to ourselves, to our relationships in the body of Christ, to the well-being of the body of Christ, if we have this love for one another. Thanks, everybody.